I remember the exact second my life split into before and after. It was 2:47 in the morning, and the Uber was pulling up to my own house. I just spent 6 hours on a red-eye from Denver, a business trip that had been nothing but a grind of stale coffee, fluorescent conference rooms, and a desperate longing for my own bed. My wife, Leah, had texted me earlier that night, a simple, "Can't wait to have you home, love you." It was soft and sweet, the kind of message that made the exhaustion feel worth it. I had smiled at my phone screen, a stupid, tired grin, and typed back, "Just landed, see you soon, grab the good wine." I was thinking about her face when I walked in, the way she'd scrunch her nose and smile, her hair probably pulled up in that messy bun she always wore when she was lounging. I was thinking about the quiet intimacy of our bedroom, the hum of the heater, the weight of the comforter. I was thinking about my best friend, Mark, who was crashed on our couch, a temporary situation that had stretched from a few days into a few weeks while he figured things out after his girlfriend kicked him out. He was a fixture now, part of the furniture. I was thinking about how I'd grab a beer with him tomorrow, hear his latest dating app horror stories, and feel grateful for the solid, unshakable life I had built. The Uber pulled into the driveway, and I remember noticing that the lights in the living room were still on. That was odd.
Leah was usually asleep by 11, and Mark had a habit of passing out with the TV on. I figured he'd just left the lamp on or fallen asleep on the couch watching some god-awful reality show. I grabbed my carry-on, slung it over my shoulder, and thanked the driver. The night air was crisp, the kind of cold that stings your lungs a little, and the street was silent, except for the distant bark of a dog. I remember thinking about how much I loved this. The quiet suburban street, the house that we'd just finished remodeling, the life we were building. It felt secure, like a fortress. I fumbled for my keys, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't wake them. I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open as gently as I could. The house smelled like candles and something else, something faintly sweet, like an expensive perfume I didn't recognize. The living room was dark, except for the lamp on the side table, casting a low amber glow across the furniture. The TV was on mute, showing some late-night talk show, the host's face frozen in a silent laugh. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and my brain took a full second to process what I was seeing. There was a third person on the couch, a girl. I didn't recognize her at first. Her hair was a mess, and she was wrapped up in a throw blanket, her back to me. Mark was lying on the other end of the couch, his head propped against the armrest, a half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels on the floor beside him. He was in his boxers and a t-shirt, looking like he'd been there for hours. Then I saw the girl shift, and my heart stopped. It wasn't a girl. It was her. It was Leah. She was wearing a silk slip that I'd never seen before, something that didn't belong in our plain, simple wardrobe. She wasn't asleep. She was just lying there, her head resting on Mark's chest, his arm draped around her in a way that looked as natural as breathing. My suitcase dropped from my hand and hit the wooden floor with a loud thud that seemed to echo through the silent house. The sound made them both stir. Mark's eyes fluttered open, and he looked groggy, disoriented. Leah's head lifted, her hair falling away from her face, and she looked right at me. Her eyes were wide, panicked, and in that fraction of a second I saw it. The guilt, the realization, the terror. But what I didn't see was confusion. She didn't look confused about why she was there or what was happening. She looked like she'd been caught, which meant it wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't a drunken mistake. It was a choice, a habit. I couldn't speak. My mouth was open, but no sound came out. My brain was screaming, a high-pitched static noise that drowned out everything else. I felt my hands balling into fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. I was waiting for her to jump up, to run to me, to start crying and apologizing. I was waiting for Mark to scramble off the couch and stammer some excuse, to blame it on the whiskey, to say he was confused, that he thought I was coming home tomorrow. But they didn't. They just both sat there, frozen, watching me. It was a tableau of betrayal, so perfectly composed that it looked staged. The woman I'd built my entire life around, the woman I'd married,
The woman I'd loved since I was 23 was lying in the arms of my best friend in my own living room, and the only thing she had to say was a weak, pathetic, "Baby, I can explain." That was the moment it cracked. The word baby. She still called me that. She had the nerve to look at me with those eyes I had loved and use the same pet name she had whispered in my ear 1,000 times. I felt a cold rage wash over me, so icy it burned. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was a quiet, deadly calm. My voice, when it finally came out, didn't even sound like my own. It was flat, a monotone. "Don't," I said. "Don't you fucking dare call me that." I picked up my suitcase, which had fallen to the floor, and I walked right past them. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything. I just walked up the stairs, my feet heavy on each step, went into the bedroom and shut the door behind me. I could hear them whispering frantically downstairs, a muffled, panicked commotion. I heard Mark's deep voice trying to calm her down, and her sharp, anxious replies. The treachery of it was unimaginable.
He was comforting her. He was being the one she went to for solace. In the home I paid for, on the couch I'd let him sleep on because I felt sorry for him. I stood in the middle of our bedroom, looking at the life we'd built, the photos on the dresser of our wedding, our vacations, our dog, the carefully chosen decorations she'd spent hours picking out, the pile of her laundry in the hamper that I'd always teased her about. It all felt like a movie set, a backdrop for a story that had already ended, and I was the last person to know. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and the door cracked open. Mark was standing there, his eyes bloodshot, his face puffy. He had the audacity to look sorry. "Bro," he said, his voice cracking. "Come on, man, let's just talk about this. You don't understand." I turned to him, my best friend since college, the guy I'd helped move apartments, the guy I'd lent money to, the guy I'd considered a brother, and I told him, in a voice so cold it surprised even me, "You don't get to call me that. You don't get to call me anything. Get out of my house. Now." He looked like he was going to argue, but then he just nodded, defeated. He disappeared, and a few minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. He left. He actually left. My best friend of 12 years walked out of my life without a fight. Then she came in. Leah. She was crying, her mascara running, her hair a mess. The silk slip, which I now realized was a piece of her she had reserved for him, was clinging to her skin. She came toward me, her arms outstretched, and I held up my hand to stop her. "Don't touch me," I said. "What the hell is going on?" And as she started to explain, the words tumbling out of her in a frantic, desperate rush, I realized that the whole time Mark had been figuring things out, he'd been figuring out how to take my life apart. She'd been going to him for comfort. One conversation led to another. One drink led to another. Then one night I was away on a business trip, and they just happened. She kept repeating that phrase. It just happened, over and over. I stood there, listening to her weave this web of excuses, and I felt like I was watching a person drown. Not her, me. I was the one drowning. The walls of the house I loved, the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary, were closing in. The air was thick, heavy, poisoned, and I knew, with a certainty that settled into my bones like a weight, that nothing would ever be the same. The silence that followed her confession was worse than the screaming I wished I was capable of. She stood there, shivering in that ridiculous slip, her arms wrapped around herself like she was the one who needed protection. The tears kept coming, big, wet, theatrical sobs that were supposed to make me feel sorry for her. But all I could feel was a profound emptiness, like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that made me human. I kept staring at her, trying to find the woman I married, the woman who held my hand when my father died, the woman who danced with me in the kitchen to old Motown records, the woman who whispered that she wanted to have children with me, to build a family, to grow old together. That woman was gone. In her place was a stranger, wearing her face, using her voice,
but with eyes that had been lying to me for weeks. She kept talking, her words blurring together into a desperate stream of consciousness. It started when I was in Chicago, then it happened again when I was in Dallas. Then it became a routine, something they did when I was away. She said it wasn't planned, that it just evolved, that feelings got complicated. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something through the window. But I just stood there, frozen, listening to her destroy our marriage one sentence at a time. She told me she still loved me. She told me it didn't mean anything. She told me Mark was just a distraction, a mistake, a temporary lapse in judgment. The more she talked, the angrier I got. Not at her, at myself, for being so blind, for trusting her completely, for believing that our love was special, that it was immune to the kind of betrayal that destroyed other people's relationships. I was the fool. I was the one who let a snake into my house, who invited it to sleep on my couch, who felt sorry for it when it had nowhere else to go. I walked out of the bedroom and down the hall to the guest room, the one we'd converted into a home office. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside filtering through the blinds. I could hear her on the other side of the door, her voice muffled, begging me to come out and talk. I pulled my knees to my chest and pressed my forehead against them. I'd never felt so alone in my entire life. Not when I was a kid whose parents divorced. Not when I lost my first job out of college. Not even when my grandfather died, the man who raised me. Nothing compared to this. This wasn't just a breakup. This was the systematic dismantling of everything I believed about love, trust, and loyalty. My best friend and my wife, the two people I trusted most in the world, had been lying to me, conspiring behind my back, making a fool out of me in my own home. I stayed in that room for hours, until the sun started to rise and I could hear the birds outside. My phone buzzed incessantly. Texts from Mark, texts from Leah, both of them trying to explain, trying to apologize, trying to make it better. I didn't read a single one. I didn't want to hear their excuses. I didn't want to understand. I just wanted the pain to stop. But it didn't. It grew, spreading through my veins like poison, infecting every memory I had. Our first date, the way she laughed at my terrible jokes. Our wedding, the way she looked at me like I was the only man in the world. Our honeymoon, the way we stayed up all night talking about our future. All of it was tainted now. Every happy moment was just a prelude to this. Every I love you was a lie waiting to be exposed. Every promise was made to be broken. At some point, I heard the front door open and close. She had left, probably to go stay with her sister, or maybe with Mark. I didn't care anymore. I was relieved. I couldn't stand to be in the same house as her, breathing the same air. I finally unlocked the door and walked back into the bedroom. It was still the same room, but it felt different, foreign. The bed we'd shared for 6 years looked like a crime scene. I stripped the sheets off, all of them, and threw them in a pile on the floor. I was going to burn them later. I opened her closet and started throwing her clothes into garbage bags. Dresses she'd worn on dates with me, sweaters I'd bought her for Christmas, jeans she'd looked so good in. I didn't care. I wanted all of it gone. I wanted every trace of her out of my life. But even as I filled bag after bag, I knew it wasn't that simple. You can't just throw away the person you loved for a decade. You can't just erase 6 years of marriage with a garbage bag. The memories were permanent. The scars would stay forever.
I called my brother, Jake, at 8 in the morning. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Dude, it's early. What's going on?" I tried to speak, but nothing came out. I just stood there, my phone pressed to my ear, unable to form words. "Hello? You there?" I finally choked out the words. Leah cheated on me. With Mark. There was a long silence on the other end. Then I heard him get out of bed, heard the rustle of sheets and the click of a door.
"I'll be there in an hour," he said. "Don't do anything stupid." He was always the practical one, the one who kept his head when everyone else was losing theirs. He showed up exactly 60 minutes later, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He didn't say anything. He just walked in, hugged me, and held on. And for the first time since I'd walked in on them, I cried. I cried like a child, ugly and loud, my body shaking with sobs I couldn't control. Jake just held me, patting my back, telling me it was going to be okay. But I knew it wasn't. Nothing was ever going to be okay again. He helped me pack up the rest of Leah's things. He took down the photos, packed up the knickknacks, emptied the bathroom of her toiletries. Every item we put in a box was another piece of our life being dismantled. I found a note she'd left on the kitchen counter before she left. It was folded neatly, with my name on it in her handwriting. I almost threw it away without reading it, but I couldn't. I had to know what she had to say. The note was 3 pages long, front and back. She apologized profusely, said she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, said she would do anything to fix it. She said she loved me, and only me, and that Mark was nothing to her. She begged me to call her, to talk, to give her a chance to explain in person. She promised she'd never see him again. She promised she'd do whatever it took to earn my trust back. I read the whole thing, and then I read it again, and then I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. She could write 100 notes. She could say 1,000,000 words. Nothing would change the image of her in Mark's arms. Nothing would erase the fact that she'd made a conscious decision over and over again to betray me. The next few days were a blur. I stayed at my brother's apartment because I couldn't bear to be in that house anymore. I slept on his pull-out couch, waking up every few hours from nightmares. In one dream, I was chasing Leah through a maze, but every time I got close to her, she disappeared. In another, I was at our wedding, saying our vows, but when I looked at her face, it was Mark staring back at me. I stopped eating. I stopped answering my phone. I quit returning emails from work. My boss called Jake, worried I'd had a breakdown. Jake covered for me, told them I had a family emergency, which was technically true. My family had imploded. My wife was a stranger. My best friend was a traitor. Everything I'd built my life around was gone. I was adrift, floating in a sea of grief and rage with no shore in sight. Leah called constantly, leaving voicemails that I deleted without listening to. She showed up at Jake's apartment twice, but I refused to see her. The second time, I watched her through the blinds, standing on the doorstep in the rain, her face a mess of tears and mascara. She looked pathetic. She looked broken. And I hated that a part of me still wanted to go out there and hold her. I hated that I still loved her. I hated myself for loving someone who could do this to me. Mark, on the other hand, didn't try to reach out. Not at first. He'd sent a few texts that first night, but after I didn't respond, he went silent. I found out later, through a mutual friend, that he'd moved back in with his ex-girlfriend, the one who kicked him out in the first place. He'd apparently gone crying back to her, telling her he'd made a terrible mistake, that he needed her, that he wanted to make things right. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark, the guy who couldn't keep a relationship together if his life depended on it, was suddenly a master of manipulation. He charmed my wife into sleeping with him, and then when it all fell apart, he went right back to his ex. It was like he had no loyalty to anyone, not even himself. He was a parasite, feeding off the people who cared about him, leaving nothing but destruction in his wake. And I'd been stupid enough to invite him into my home. I finally decided to face Leah, not because I wanted to fix things, but because I needed closure. I needed to look her in the eyes and tell her it was over. I called her on a Thursday morning, my hand shaking as I dialed her number. She answered on the first ring, her voice desperate. "Baby, please, I've been so worried. Just let me explain." I cut her off. "Meet me at the house, tomorrow at noon. We need to talk." She agreed immediately, almost too eagerly, like she thought this was a chance for reconciliation. I didn't correct her. I hung up and spent the rest of the day preparing myself for what I had to do. I rehearsed the words in my head. I told myself I had to be strong. I told myself I couldn't let her manipulate me. I told myself I deserved better. But even as I steeled myself, I felt the doubt creeping in. What if I was making a mistake? What if we could fix this? What if she really was sorry? But then I remembered the picture of them on the couch, the casual intimacy of the way they were lying together, and all the doubt vanished. There was no fixing this. There was no coming back from this. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. I arrived at the house first. I wanted to see her walk in. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized I wasn't going to forgive her. I stood in the living room, the same living room where I'd found them, and I waited. At exactly noon, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I watched through the window as she got out, looking thinner than I remembered, her eyes red and swollen. She was wearing a simple dress, one I'd always liked, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her keys, taking a deep breath before walking toward the door. I opened it before she could knock. She looked up at me and the tear started immediately. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I love you. I love you so much." I stepped aside and let her in. We stood in the living room, facing each other, the distance between us feeling like miles. She reached out to touch my hand and I pulled away. "Don't," I said. "Just talk." She talked. She told me everything. The first time it happened, she'd been upset about a fight we'd had, a stupid fight about money, about how I was working too much, about how she felt neglected. Mark had been there to comfort her. He'd listened. He'd been sympathetic. He'd made her feel seen. One thing led to another. She swore it was just physical, that there were no feelings involved. It was just convenient, a way to feel wanted when I wasn't around. She said she'd tried to end it several times, but Mark kept pushing, and she was too weak to say no. She blamed herself. She blamed Mark. She blamed our relationship. But the more she talked, the more I realized she wasn't really sorry. She was sorry she got caught. If I hadn't come home early, they'd still be doing it. They'd still be lying to me. The only thing that had changed was that their secret was out. She was crying out of fear of losing me, not out of remorse for what she'd done. And that was the moment I knew I was done. There was nothing left to save. I told her I wanted a divorce. The words came out flat, hollow, like I was reading a script for a movie I didn't want to be in. She stared at me, her mouth open, her eyes wide with disbelief. It was like she genuinely hadn't seen this coming, like she thought her tears and her apologies would be enough to fix everything. She started begging, her voice rising to that desperate pitch I'd heard so many times over the past few days. She fell to her knees, literally fell to her knees on the hardwood floor of our living room, clutching at my legs, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. She told me she'd die without me. She told me she'd kill herself if I left her. She told me she'd do anything, absolutely anything, to make it right. And I looked down at this woman I'd loved with my whole heart, this woman I'd promised to protect and cherish for the rest of my life, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a cold, empty void where my emotions used to be. She was a stranger to me now, a stranger wearing a familiar face, using familiar words, but someone I no longer recognized. I gently pulled my legs away from her and walked to the kitchen. I needed space. I needed air. I opened the refrigerator and stared inside, not seeing anything, just needing something to do with my hands. She followed me, still crying, still pleading. She stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, looking so small and broken. For a split second, I felt a flicker of the old tenderness, the instinct to comfort her, but I pushed it down. I couldn't afford to feel sorry for her. Not now. Not after everything. I turned to face her and told her, as calmly as I could, that we needed to be practical. We needed to figure out the logistics. Who was keeping the house? who was taking the dog, how we would split our savings, our retirement accounts, our furniture. She looked horrified, like I was being cruel, like I was taking pleasure in tearing our life apart. But I wasn't. I was just trying to survive. I was trying to navigate a shipwreck without drowning. She moved out that weekend. I helped her pack, not out of kindness, but out of a desperate need to get it over with as quickly as possible. Every dress she folded, every book she boxed, every photo she carefully wrapped in newspaper felt like a small death. She took the dog, a golden retriever we'd raised together since he was a puppy. She argued that she needed him more, that she'd be alone in her new apartment, that he was her emotional support. I let her take him.
I couldn't stand the thought of waking up every morning and seeing that dog, knowing he'd never understand why his mommy and daddy weren't together anymore. I kept the house. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving. This was my home. I'd poured my blood, sweat, and tears into this place. I'd scraped and saved for the down payment. I'd spent every weekend for 2 years renovating it. It was the only thing in my life that hadn't betrayed me. So I stayed, surrounded by the ghost of our marriage, the echoes of her laugh in the hallways, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered in the closet. The first few weeks were brutal. I barely left the house. I ordered takeout every night, eating alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. I stopped shaving. I stopped caring about anything. My brother Jake came by almost every day, checking on me, trying to get me out of the house. He'd drag me to a bar, buy me a beer, and listen while I vented for hours. He was patient, steady, the rock I needed to hold on to. But even he couldn't fill the void. I'd go to bed at night, lying in that empty bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every fight, every moment I might have missed. I tortured myself with what-ifs. What if I'd been home more? What if I'd been more attentive? What if I'd seen the signs? I started questioning everything, even my own sanity. Was I a bad husband? Was I neglectful? Was I so wrapped up in my own life that I'd pushed her away? My therapist, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Dr. Harris, told me I was doing the classic victim spiral, blaming myself, taking responsibility for someone else's choices. She told me that no matter how imperfect our marriage was, I didn't force Leah into bed with Mark. That was a decision she made over and over again without my input. I knew she was right, but knowing something and feeling something are two very different things. Then, about 3 weeks after she moved out, I got a call from a mutual friend, a guy named Tom who'd been in our wedding party. He sounded nervous, hesitant, like he was about to tell me something I didn't want to hear. "Hey man," he said, his voice low. "I don't know if you want to know this, but I thought you should." My stomach dropped. I knew it was about Leah. It had to be. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. Tom told me that Mark and Leah were seeing each other, officially, publicly. He'd run into them at a restaurant downtown, holding hands, laughing, looking like a couple. He said they looked happy. He said they didn't seem to care who saw them. I hung up the phone and sat there, stunned. She'd promised me, sworn on her mother's life, that it was over with Mark. She told me she hated him, that he was nothing to her, that the whole thing was a huge mistake. And now she was with him, not just sleeping with him, but dating him, showing him off like he was a prize. The betrayal felt fresh again, like I was finding out for the first time. Only this time it was worse, because she lied to me, looked me in the eyes and lied. Even when she was begging for forgiveness, she was lying. I called her. I couldn't help it. I needed to hear it from her. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. "Hey," she said. "I wasn't expecting you to call." I cut straight to the point. "Are you seeing Mark?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then she sighed, a heavy, resigned sound. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I just didn't know how." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was going to tell me, like it was a minor detail, like it was something she'd forgotten to mention. I felt the rage boiling up inside me, hot and uncontrollable. "You told me it was over," I said, my voice shaking. "You swore to me it was over. You stood in my kitchen and promised me you'd never see him again." She started crying. Of course she did. She always cried when she was caught.
"I know," she sobbed. "I know I said that, but I can't help how I feel. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I hung up on her. I couldn't listen to another word. She wasn't sorry. She was just sorry she got caught. Again. I spent the next few days in a fog of rage and humiliation. I couldn't stop thinking about them together. What did she see in him? He was a fucking loser. He couldn't hold down a job. He couldn't commit to anything. He was the guy who always showed up late, who always forgot his wallet, who always needed someone to bail him out. And she'd chosen him over me, over our marriage, over our future. The humiliation was worse than the heartbreak. Everyone knew. Our friends, our families, our coworkers, they all knew that my wife had left me for my best friend. I could feel their pity, their whispered conversations, their awkward looks when I walked into a room. I was a cautionary tale, the guy whose wife ran off with the guy he'd taken in. I'd been a fool, and everyone knew it. Then I started drinking, not socially, not casually. I started drinking to forget. I'd come home from work, crack open a bottle of whiskey, and drink until I couldn't feel anything anymore. I'd sit on the couch, the same couch where I'd found them, and I'd drink until the room started spinning. I'd pass out, wake up with a pounding headache, and do it all over again. Jake tried to stop me. He'd pour the bottles down the sink, but I'd just buy more. He'd lecture me, tell me I was throwing my life away, tell me Leah wasn't worth it. But I didn't care. I didn't want to be sober. Sobriety meant feeling the pain. Sobriety meant facing the reality of what my life had become. I'd rather be numb. I'd rather be dead. One night, I drank so much that I ended up in the emergency room. I don't even remember how I got there. Jake told me later that he'd found me passed out on the floor, barely breathing.
They pumped my stomach, hooked me up to an IV, and kept me overnight for observation. When I woke up, Jake was sitting in the chair next to my bed, his eyes red, his face pale. "You scared the hell out of me," he said. "What the hell are you doing?" I didn't have an answer. I just stared at the ceiling, feeling hollow and empty. The doctor came in, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, and told me I was lucky to be alive. He said my liver enzymes were elevated, that if I kept drinking like that, I'd be dead within a year. He recommended therapy, rehab, a support group. I nodded along, pretending to listen, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. But that night in the hospital was a wake-up call. Not because I suddenly saw the light or found Jesus, but because I looked at Jake, my brother, the guy who dropped everything to take care of me, and I saw how much I was hurting him. He had dark circles under his eyes. He looked older than I remembered. He'd been carrying the weight of my grief, and I'd been too selfish to notice. I promised him, right there in that sterile hospital room, that I'd get my act together. I'd go to therapy, I'd stop drinking, I'd start living again. He didn't believe me at first. He'd heard promises like that before, but I meant it. I didn't want to be the guy who destroyed himself over a woman who didn't deserve him. I didn't want to be the cautionary tale. I wanted to be the one who survived. The one who came out the other side stronger, better, more resilient. I wanted to make her regret what she'd done, not by wallowing in self-pity, but by building a life so good that she'd look at it and wonder what the hell she was thinking. So I started putting myself back together. I went to therapy every week, spilling my guts to Dr. Harris, unpacking all the anger and grief and shame. I joined a gym and started working out, channeling my rage into physical exertion. I threw myself into my work, taking on extra projects, staying late, proving to everyone that I wasn't broken. I started reconnecting with old friends, the ones I'd neglected during my marriage. I forced myself to socialize, even when every cell in my body wanted to stay home and hide. It was hard. It was so goddamn hard. Some days I'd wake up and the grief would hit me like a freight train, and I'd have to talk myself out of calling in sick and crawling back into bed. But I kept going.
I kept putting one foot in front of the other. And slowly, painfully, I started to feel like myself again. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from a woman named Sarah. She was a friend of a friend, someone I'd met briefly at a barbecue. We'd hit it off, exchanging numbers, but I hadn't been ready to date. She understood, gave me space, and checked in every once in a while. This time, I was ready. We went out for coffee, and it was easy. She was smart, funny, kind. She didn't pry into my past.
She didn't treat me like I was damaged goods. She just listened and laughed at my jokes and made me feel like a normal person again. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not that I was ready to fall in love again, but hope that maybe, just maybe, I could be happy again. Then everything fell apart. I got a text from Leah, out of the blue, after months of silence. It was a photo, a sonogram, and a message that read, "I'm pregnant. It's Mark's, and I need to talk to you." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Why was she telling me this? Why did I need to know? We were divorced. We were nothing to each other. But then the next message came through. "There's something I never told you, something I should have told you a long time ago. Please, just let me explain." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. My carefully rebuilt life suddenly felt fragile again, like a house of cards ready to collapse. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her voice. But I knew I had to. I knew she was about to tell me something that would change everything all over again, and I was terrified of what it might be. I met her at a diner on the other side of town, a neutral place where I wouldn't have to walk into a space filled with our shared history. I got there early, sitting in a booth by the window, watching the door. The place smelled like stale coffee and burnt grease, the kind of place where secrets felt safe, where nobody cared about the drama unfolding in the corner booth. I ordered black coffee and waited, my leg bouncing under the table, my hands wrapped around the warm mug like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She was bigger, not just in the way pregnant women get, but heavier in the face, her features softer, her eyes carrying a weight I hadn't seen before. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in weeks. She saw me and gave a small, tentative wave, like we were old friends reuniting after a long time. Not like ex-husband and ex-wife. Not like she'd destroyed my life and then run off with the man who helped her do it. She slid into the booth across from me, placing her purse on the seat beside her. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face, and I could see the tears forming. I braced myself for the theatrics, the waterworks, the manipulation I'd come to expect. But the tears never came. She just sat there, staring at her hands, her shoulders hunched. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice quiet, stripped of all the drama. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I don't deserve anything from you." I didn't respond. I just waited. She took a deep breath, like she was gathering courage, and then she said the words that sent my world skinning off its axis again. "The baby isn't Mark's." I blinked, trying to process what she'd just said. "What do you mean it's not Mark's?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "You sent me a sonogram. You said it was his." She shook her head, her eyes finally meeting mine. "I lied. I needed to see you. I needed to tell you the truth. The baby is yours." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and impossible. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to laugh and say she was joking. But she didn't laugh. She just sat there, her hands trembling, her face pale. "That's not possible," I said, my voice flat. "We haven't been together in months. I haven't touched you since before the divorce." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know, but I found out right before I moved out. I was 2 weeks late, and I took a test, and it was positive. I was going to tell you, but then everything fell apart with you and Mark, and I didn't know how." I felt the room spinning, the walls closing in. "You knew you were pregnant when you left me?" I asked, my voice rising. "You knew I had a child,
My child growing inside you, and you didn't tell me? She flinched at my anger, shrinking back into the booth. I was scared, she whispered. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I told you, you'd think I was trying to trap you. I thought you'd hate me even more than you already did. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to stand up and walk out and never look back. But I was rooted to the spot, my mind racing through the implications of what she was saying. A baby. My baby. She was carrying my child, and she'd kept it from me for months. While I was drinking myself into oblivion, while I was picking up the pieces of my shattered life, she was growing a part of me inside her, a part of me that she hadn't even given me the chance to know about. Why are you telling me now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why now? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. Because Mark found out. He went through my phone and saw the doctor's appointments. He knew I was lying about the due date. He confronted me, and I told him the truth. He left me. He said he couldn't raise another man's child. I almost laughed at that. Mark, the man who had no problem sleeping with his best friend's wife, had drawn the line at raising a baby that wasn't his. The hypocrisy was staggering. So you're telling me because Mark ditched you? I said, my voice dripping with bitterness. Because your backup plan fell through? She shook her head, more tears streaming down her face. No, I'm telling you because you deserve to know. Because this is your child too. Because I can't do this alone. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you. But I thought you had the right to know. I sat there in silence, staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the woman I'd married. They were the same person, but they felt like strangers. I didn't know what to feel. I was angry, of course, furious that she'd kept this from me, that she'd robbed me of months of knowing about my own child. But underneath the anger, buried so deep I barely recognized it, was something else, something that felt suspiciously like hope. A child, a baby that was half me, half her, a chance to be a father, a chance to have a family, even if it wasn't the family I'd imagined. I hated that I felt that hope. I hated that she could still have any power over me, but I couldn't deny it. I couldn't pretend that the thought of being a dad didn't stir something inside me. How far along are you? I asked, my voice softening against my will. 7 months, she said, her voice trembling. I'm due in 8 weeks. 7 months. She'd been pregnant for 7 months, and she hadn't said a word. I'd been signing divorce papers, packing up her things, trying to forget she existed, and all the while she was carrying my child. The weight of it hit me like a physical blow. I need a paternity test, I said, my voice firm. I need to be sure. She nodded, her expression resigned. I understand. I'll do whatever you need. I know you don't trust me. I know I've given you every reason not to. I didn't argue with that. I couldn't. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford with her anymore. But even as I said the words, I knew in my gut that she was telling the truth. The timing, the way she looked at me, the desperate honesty in her voice, it all added up. This was my child, and that changed everything. We sat in that diner for 2 hours, hashing out the details. She'd been living in a tiny apartment on the other side of town, working part-time at a bookstore, barely scraping by. Mark had been contributing nothing, spending most of his time at bars, trying to pick up other women. She'd been alone, carrying the weight of her choices and the weight of our child. I felt a flicker of pity for her, despite everything. Not enough to forgive her, not enough to trust her, but enough to know that I couldn't walk away. I couldn't abandon my child, even if my child was growing inside the woman who'd broken my heart. I told her I'd be there for the birth. I told her I'd provide financial support. I told her I'd fight for custody, for visitation, for whatever rights I had as a father. She agreed to everything, her head bowed, her voice meek. She knew she had no leverage. She knew she'd already lost everything that mattered. The paternity test came back exactly a week later. I was sitting in my living room, the same living room where I'd found them, holding the letter in my hands. I'd been dreading this moment, afraid that somehow she'd been lying again, that the baby wasn't mine, and I'd been dragged back into her web of manipulation for nothing. But when I opened the envelope and saw the results, I felt a strange, overwhelming relief. 99.9%. The baby was mine. I was going to be a father. I sat there for a long time, staring at the numbers, letting it sink in. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was quieter now, muted by the enormity of what was coming. A child, a life, something that was bigger than Leah, bigger than Mark, bigger than the betrayal, something that demanded my attention, my love, my presence. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments and preparations. I went with Leah to the obstetrician, sitting in the waiting room with all the other expectant fathers, feeling like an imposter. The ultrasound was incredible. Seeing my child on that screen, seeing the tiny heart beating, the little fingers and toes, the curve of the face, I cried. I couldn't help it. The tears came streaming down my face, and Leah reached out and took my hand. I pulled away. I wasn't ready to touch her. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. But I stayed. I stayed for the whole appointment, asking questions, making notes, trying to be present. The doctor, a kind older woman named Dr. Patel, looked at me with a knowing smile. "First time?" she asked. I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. "You'll do great," she said. "Just be there. That's all they need." We had a long conversation about logistics. She was going to need help after the baby was born. Her family was in another state, and she didn't have many friends who weren't tied to our old life. I told her I'd stay in the guest room for the first few weeks, helping with the baby, making sure she was okay. She looked at me like I was offering her a lifeline, like she hadn't expected anything from me. I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for my child. But I could see the guilt in her eyes, the weight of everything she'd done. And for the first time, I felt something close to pity. Not forgiveness, never forgiveness, but a grudging acknowledgement that she was human, flawed, and broken, just like everyone else. The birth was chaotic. I got the call at 3 a.m, her voice panicked and breathless. "It's time. I'm at the hospital. Please come." I drove like a madman, running red lights, my heart pounding in my chest. I made it to the hospital just as they were wheeling her into the delivery room. They let me in, scrubbing my hands, putting on a gown, and then I was standing next to her, holding her hand, watching her push. She was screaming, sweating, crying. I'd never seen her so vulnerable, so raw. I forgot in that moment all the anger, all the betrayal, all the pain. I just saw a woman bringing my child into the world. And when the baby came, when I heard that first cry, when the nurse placed that tiny, squirming, beautiful bundle in my arms, I felt something shift inside me. Everything that had come before, all the heartbreak and the rage, it all faded into the background. There was only this, my daughter. Her name was Emma. She had my eyes, my nose, my stubborn chin. She was perfect, and she was mine. I spent the next few weeks living in Leah's apartment, sleeping on her lumpy couch, waking up every 2 hours to feed Emma, change her, rock her back to sleep. I was exhausted, completely and utterly drained, but I'd never been happier. I'd never felt so alive. Emma was everything. She was my reason to get up in the morning, my reason to keep going, my reason to forgive. Not Leah. I still hadn't forgiven Leah, but I'd stopped hating her. The hate was too heavy to carry, too exhausting to maintain. I'd let it go, not for her sake, but for mine. I needed to be free of it. I needed to be the kind of father Emma deserved, and that meant letting go of the past, even if I could never forget it. Mark reached out to me once, about a month after Emma was born. He sent me a long, rambling text, apologizing for everything, saying he was in AA, trying to get his life together. He said he was ashamed of what he'd done, that he'd lost the 2 best things in his life, that he hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive him someday. I read the text, and then I deleted it. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He was a ghost from a past life, a reminder of a betrayal I'd spent months recovering from. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need anything from him. I had Emma. I had my family. I had a future, a bright one, full of possibility and hope.
Sarah, the woman I'd been dating, understood when I told her about the baby. She didn't run. She didn't judge. She came with me to meet Emma, holding her gently, cooing at her, asking if she could babysit sometime. She was patient, kind, and generous. She gave me space when I needed it, and support when I needed that. She never pushed me to move faster than I was ready. She just showed up, day after day, proving that she was different. She was the kind of woman who could be trusted, who wouldn't break my heart. And one night, a few months later, sitting on my porch, watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "I think I'm falling in love with you." I looked at her face glowing in the golden light, and I realized I was falling in love with her too. The fear was still there, the ghost of what happened with Leah, the fear of being hurt again. But I pushed it down. I'd let fear control me for too long. I'd let it keep me from happiness. I wasn't going to let it win. I still think about that night sometimes, the night I came home early and found them. It's faded now, the edges blurred, the pain dulled. It's just a scar, a reminder of what I survived. I don't forgive Leah. I don't think I ever will. But I'm not angry anymore. I've let go of the anger, the bitterness, the rage. It wasn't serving me. It was holding me back, and I have too much to live for now. Enna is growing up fast, saying her first words, taking her first steps. She's a whirlwind of chaos and joy, and I wouldn't trade her for anything. Leah is still in my life, as the mother of my child. We co-parent, we talk, we make decisions together. We'll never be friends. We'll never be what we were, but we found a way to coexist, to put Emma first. It's not perfect. It's messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but it's real. It's ours. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like everything is going to be okay. I'm not the same man I was before. I'm harder, wiser, more cautious, but I'm also more grateful, more present, more aware of the fragility of happiness. I've learned that you can't control what other people do. You can only control how you respond. And I've chosen to respond with strength, with grace, with an open heart. Because that's what my daughter deserves. That's what I deserve. That's what we all deserve in the end.
সাগরের ঢেউ দেখিয়া নাই মন সাগরে নানা মিলে সাধন ভজন সকলি যাই বিফলে গো সকলি যাই বিফলে ওরে রূপ সাগরের ঢেউ দেখিয়া নাই মন সাগরে নানা মিলে সাধন ভজন সকলি যাই বিফলে গো সকলি যাই বিফলে আহা সাগরের দুই মোহনা একটি আশা একটি যাওয়া সাধক যারা নাই মোতারা সাধক যাহারা নাই মোতারা সাধক যারা নাই মোতারা সাধক সারা যায় ডুবে রূপসাগরে ডুব দিও না সাঁতার না জানলে মনে রূপসাগরে ডুব দিও না সাঁতার না জানলে সাগরের খাইছো ননি আসিয়া এই ববেতে ওরে আরেক সাগরটাকে তোমায় নিতে তার মোহনাতে গো, নিতে তার মোহনাতে। ও এক সাগরের খাইছো ননি আসিয়া এই ববেতে, আরেক সাগরটাকে তোমায় নিতে তার মোহনাতে গো, নিতে তার মোহনাতে। ওরে মোহনাতে জুয়ার বাটা, মোহনাতে জুয়ার বাটা, না জানিয়া যাব দিলে মন মরবি অকালে। রূপসাগরে ডুব দিও না সাঁতার না জানলে মনে, রূপসাগরে ডুব দিও না সাঁতার না জানলে। সাগরের সাধক যারা তারা নাইমা সাগরে, আরে এক চুমুকে শুকাই পানি, ডুবার বয়তার না থাকে গো, ডুবার বয়তার না থাকে। ওরে রূপসাগরের সাধক যারা তারা নাইমা সাগরে, এক চুমুকে শুকাই পানি, ডুবার বয়তার না থাকে গো, ডুবার বয়তার না থাকে। ওরে জয় বেবে কয় সাধক সারা, জয় বেবে কয় সাধক সারা, জয় বেবে কয় সাধক সারা, জুয়ার আসলে যাই ডুবে। রূপসাগরে ডুব দিও না সাঁতার না জানলে মনে, রূপসাগরে ডুব দিও না সাঁতার না জানলে। রূপসাগরে ডুব দিও না সাঁতার না জানলে, রূপসাগরে ডুব দিও না সাঁতার না